What's up, everybody? NFL Week 6 Survivor Picks. Let's do it. Before we hop in, of course, always remember to show us some love in the comment section, giving us a like, and subscribing to the channel. Looking at the 9 teams we're looking at this week, a lot of these teams are teams that we've seen week in and week out. You get your perennial, your weekly Survivor considerations like the Bills, Dolphins, Chiefs, Niners, Eagles, a couple newer teams as well this week around. And as always, none of this happens in a vacuum. None of our Survivor decisions happen in isolation. We always like to consult the schedule to see who we may pick that might not be available or might not even be in consideration later in the season. So this is the schedule that I kind of like to look at. I narrowed down the teams for each week into distill it down into a handful of teams, look at their schedule, and pick out games where I think I'd like to pick them later on this season. You can see that some teams obviously have more green spots, more games that I think they would be taken in a Survivor week, and some teams that I might not take it all for the rest of the season. So that's something certainly you want to consider when making a pick this week and any week. Starting off the video with the first team that you want to be careful about when you're picking. That is the bottom team in this list. That is the Las Vegas Raiders taking on the Patriots. This is not so much about the Patriots, who have looked in the last couple of weeks like one of the worst teams in football. They've scored about 3 points over their last, maybe 6 points over their last 2 games, and have led up 30 plus over the last 3 games as well. They look like they can't stop anybody. They look like they have nothing going for them in offense. And they're playing a game on the road in Las Vegas in a pretty rowdy home field environment for the Raiders. All that being said, I don't love what I've seen on the eyeball test for the Raiders. They haven't gotten Josh Jacobs, the last year's rushing leader, going in the run game. This offensive line hasn't given Jimmy Garoppolo a ton of time in the pocket. The only real bright spot in offense has been Devontae Adams, of course. And I guess you can give Jacoby Myers, the number 2 wide receiver that they got from the Patriots, a little bit of credit too. He's been stepping up. But this Raiders team, and especially any team quarterbacked by Jimmy Garoppolo, isn't made to push the ball downfield, and they're really lacking the deep threat that they were missing from Darren Waller and the deep threat from Derek Carr's arm last season. So that's hurting the Raiders. On the defensive side, they're really the one shining spot there is Max Crosby, as it has been for the last few seasons, but nothing really special or anything to write home about for this Raiders defense. It's just any team that's playing a Bill Belichick team, especially Bill Belichick playing someone under his coaching tree. Josh McDaniels, the longtime Patriots offensive coordinator, probably means a little bit more to him, much like when Saban plays other SEC teams that were under his coaching tree. Something definitely to consider with how the Raiders have looked this season. I think the Patriots are better than their record shows. I don't think they're all that great, but given the Raiders, outside of Max Crosby's inability to rush the passer, you finally give Mac Jones or whoever's playing quarterback time for the New England, and it could be scary. Doesn't mean it's a bad pick necessarily, but just something to think about. They're only favored by 3 points here at home, which means this game would be very close on a neutral field. So something to consider. I think people might be buying the Raiders a little bit and selling the Patriots, and you just want to avoid that kind of thinking because while the Patriots have looked bad, they get paid to play football too, and they still have one of the best coaches in football. So something to consider in Week 6. Another game I want to talk about before we go on to the best pick, that would be the Jaguars versus the Colts here. The Jaguars played a home team against another poor divisional opponent this season and lost against the Texans. So there's nothing that you can write out here in terms of games in the AFC South. It seems like the Jaguars always seem to either play up or down to their competition when it comes to these AFC South divisional matchups, and the Colts is a prime example. It really just seems like no matter what's happening in these divisional matchups, you can throw out the records and throw out whatever notions that you think you've gathered from this team this week or this season, and it's going to be a close game. On top of that, the Colts have looked solid, beating the Titans at home this last week, and another AFC South divisional opponent. Anthony Richardson looking to get more and more acquainted at quarterback position after being a top 5 pick there. Jonathan Taylor back at running back, but the real story in that backfield is Zach Moss, who's been playing incredible. Things are really starting to click for the Colts offensively more and more each week, and that defense is as stout as ever. The Jaguars after being acclimated to 2 weeks on London time or traveling back to the States and playing. That's always a little bit more dangerous, especially after not just 1 week, but 2 weeks in London, feeling extra groggy, trying to adjust to the Eastern time in Florida. I do think that plays a factor. I mentioned it in the last video that I had about why I thought that would affect the Bills, and it certainly did. So the time change is a real thing and how it affects the body in preparation and sleep and everything that goes into game planning. So that, on top of especially the divisional opponent aspect of this game, makes me a little weary of taking the Jaguars. The best pick here, for the first time in a while, it's not the team that is favored by the most points. It is the Dolphins, to very few people's surprise. Taking on the Panthers, who are the only winless team in football now after the Bears won on Thursday night. The Dolphins here, it doesn't really matter. It seems like who's healthy or not. With Akane, the running back, with some knee problems right now, their team is just so fast and so adept at putting up points that you really need to have a juggernaut offense if you want to compete with these guys like the Bills did. The Panthers certainly haven't shown they have that in them in any capacity this season. I think this game needs little analysis if you've watched any bit of the Panthers play this year. Again, only team without a win. Rookie quarterback Bryce Young still has not adapted to NFL speed like C.J. Stroud has, and they've really struggled in all aspects of the football field. The one bright spot on this team would be Adam Thielen, the veteran wide receiver they got from the Vikings this past offseason, who has been Young's favorite target so far. But outside of that connection, this team hasn't been able to get anything. Young, who's been prone to throwing turnovers here, is going to have to be in a lot of passing situations if this game goes according to plan for the Dolphins. Dolphins get up early, make the Panthers throw the ball early and often, and that just sounds like trouble for this Panthers team that has not been able to demonstrate the ability to do so all season long. Some good value here on the board. Again, value is really dictated by two things. Teams that you haven't picked this season, of course, and more importantly, will likely not pick later in the season. So to really figure out value, we're taking a look at the schedule here, and there are two teams that I'm looking at right away that pop out for a value play. That number one would be the Raiders. I'm looking at their schedule, especially with a poor team, a team that only has is under 500 in record. I'm looking at situations to pick them for non-conference home games. And when I'm seeing that, they don't have a ton of options. They do have the Giants in Week 9 would be the most suitable option. But even then, the Raiders haven't looked that good enough for me to say, I'm going to save these guys and keep them in my back pocket for another week this season. So I think they're looking really good. And the Jaguars. Coincidentally, these are two teams I just mentioned to be careful about. But that doesn't negate the fact that there's a ton of value for both these picks here. Again, non-conference home schedules. Like you've got the Niners, the Bengals, the Ravens. These are all playoff teams winning their division. I guess or teams that have won the division last year, and playoff caliber teams for sure. And they got the one chance with Carolina, but that's week 17. So if you don't pick the Jaguars this week, in my mind, you're saying, well, I'm going to wait until week 17 to take them. And if you played Survivor before, you know that week 17 is certainly not guaranteed. So ironically enough, the two teams that I recommended to at least think twice about picking, I do think have the greatest value here. Again, what makes me scared, especially for the Jaguars, is that it's a divisional game, and they've struggled against divisional teams in the past couple seasons. And they're also coming back after a long 2 weeks in London. For the Raiders, I just haven't loved the way they looked, but they do find themselves in a very favorable matchup against one team in the Patriots that is certainly sliding as of the last few weeks. Talked about those teams I think have the best value. Some good value also to be found with the Rams here. Again, just like the Jaguars, it is a divisional game, which always scares me. But I think the Rams, again, I've said it just about every video this season that I've mentioned them. I think they're certainly better than what they were last year and better than people give them credit for. Certainly the emergence and return of Cooper Kupp will help his team alongside some great wide receivers that have been playing really well in the system with Sean McVay and Matt Stafford, those names being Tutu Atwell and Puka Nacua. Despite the fact that the Cardinals have looked pretty competitive in some games this year, they still find themselves as 6.5-point underdogs. Again, this is good value, certainly a little less risky than the other two plays that I mentioned, but still risk there. Again, divisional opponent, Cardinals have looked competitive, but they really struggle on just about every phase of the game outside the running offense. They've been according to Pro Football Focus's grades, pretty elite when it comes to the run game, and some of that is bolstered by their quarterback Josh Dobbs' ability to run the football. Outside of that, they're really subpar, especially on the defense side of the football. So when your strength is offense and you're down points most of the game, it's hard to keep running the football, and that's situations that the Cardinals keep finding themselves in. With how potent the Rams' offense have looked this year, especially last week with Cooper Kupp being back, I would anticipate the Rams winning this game. I think it's a great value pick here. The only thing that I have it as good value, the only thing that doesn't make it great value is that I think you pick the Rams a couple more times this season, and it's also against the divisional opponent. Some other picks I want to talk about. The Bills here, I'd be really surprised if they lost this game, dropping 2 in a row. They do have the Jaguars effect with the traveling back from London, but they were only there for 1 week. I really don't think the Bills would lose 2 games in a row when they're really fighting to win this division. If they lose this game, it starts to look pretty bleak as the Dolphins start to run away with it. So I would bet good money the Bills win this game. The reason it's not the best pick is because, one, the Giants are playing a little more desperately and have a little more talent than the Panthers do, and 2, the Bills' defensive players, the Bills' defensive stars especially, keep dropping like flies with injuries. This defense is getting more and more depleted each game that goes on throughout the season. Again, it's not enough where I think the Bills lose this game, but it's a great pick, just not the best pick, which is the Dolphins. Chiefs, Thursday night game against the Broncos. Again, divisional opponent here. You're going to find yourself with the Chiefs in a lot of great picks this season. This is one of them. But with a desperate team like the Broncos in the divisional matchup, I think it's going to be closer than 10.5, despite what we've seen from both these teams and how good they've been. Again, divisional matchups, especially in this AFC West along with the AFC South, anything can happen here. These teams play each other incredibly difficultly. A lot of passion and a lot of pride in divisional matchups, especially against these two teams. And I would think this game's a little bit closer than we think, but again, would be surprised if the Chiefs lost. Just not the kind of game that I'm willing to take the Chiefs on this week. Jets and Niners here. I like both Eagles and Niners here. Both great teams, both undefeated this season, but they're both on the road. They're both playing, teams with great defenses. More importantly, that's just kind of setting yourself up for an upset. We saw with the Niners, if they can dismantle the Cowboys the way they did, they can probably do so against the Browns. Eagles look pretty good, but the Jets, coming off a good competitive game against the Chiefs and then a win against the Broncos, maybe they have some momentum going and take down the Eagles as they're flying high at 5-0, maybe looking past the Jets on the road here. I think these are two great teams, the Eagles and Niners, that you really don't need to pick this week because they're on the road. If you find yourself having already picked the 4 teams above, then I think they're a good selection, but otherwise you can wait for your time for a different week. And then finally, the last game, talk about the Ravens on the road against the Titans. Ravens just losing a horrible game against the Steelers where their wide receivers dropped basically every perfect throw that Lamar tossed their way. And the Titans with a tough loss on the road against the divisional rival Colts. This game scares me, not because the Ravens and Lamar Jackson look bad, but I always am afraid of a Titans team. Again, if you watch this channel for long enough, you know how much credence I give to the Titans roster, no matter who is actually on their personnel, just because of how good their coach Mike Vrabel is. On the road against a good team like the Titans that needs its win to stay relevant in the division, I think it's risky. Is it likely the Ravens drop 2-0 or 0 the last 2 games with how good the defense has looked? Not likely, but you never know against the Titans and how well they game plan against teams. Lamar Jackson phoned in or dialed in one of the best performances of his career against the Steelers. Just didn't translate to the box score because of how many drop passes, especially drop passes in the end zone that came from his receiving core. All that is a long-winded answer to say I think the Ravens are good, but I think the Titans are the ultimate upset team in football, especially when they're at home, and a game that isn't quite perceived with caution, but certainly one that I'm worried about. Well, that's the video, guys. Best of luck in week 6. I hope you guys make an informed decision with this video. Let me know in the comment section if you got any questions, and I'll do everything I can to help. But best of luck, and I hope to see you in week 7.